We're going to begin the hour with the very latest on this morning's breaking news. U.S. President Donald Trump is dropping another bombshell in the U.S. trade war with Canada. He is ending all negotiations over tariffs in a surprise move late last night because of this ad, which Ontario paid for to run on U.S. television.
But over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer. America's jobs and growth are at stake.
Using an address from Ronald Reagan, that's some of the ad that triggered Trump's rage, and he now appears to be flipping over the table on trade talks a little over 2 weeks after what appeared to be a cordial meeting between Prime Minister Mark Carney and Donald Trump at the White House. It's unclear right now if Carney had any warning of this. As we've been reporting, the two leaders have been texting and talking on the phone throughout what has been a grinding negotiation process. Chris Reyes is covering the U.S. story for us and leads off our coverage. So this decision late last night, Chris, it was after 11 p.m. Eastern, apparently out of the blue, and he's saying more this morning again on his social media platform. What is the latest?
Yeah, I mean, you're right on the money describing President Trump's reaction. And it really all started, Heather, with the Ronald Reagan Foundation coming out last night, taking issue with Ontario's ad using audio from President Reagan's speech from 1987, in which he praises fair trade and clearly makes a case against tariffs, saying that it hurts American workers and shrinks markets. That ad started running about a week ago on all of the big U.S. networks. The foundation posted on social media that this ad misrepresents the speech, that the Ontario government didn't ask or get permission to use it, and that they're considering legal action. And that is when the reaction came from President Trump. Just a few hours later after that post, President Trump used that reason to abruptly end all trade talks with Canada. On Truth Social, he called Ontario's ad fake, called Canada's actions egregious, and then accused Canada of trying to interfere with the Supreme Court and other courts which are considering challenges to Trump's tariffs. And he has posted again this morning, Heather, sounding very angry, full of accusations. On Truth Social, he posted, "Canada cheated and got caught. They fraudulently took a big buy ad saying that Ronald Reagan did not like tariffs when actually he loved tariffs for our country," Trump writes. He said that he loved that tariffs for the U.S.'s national security. Trump again accused Canada of trying to illegally influence the United States Supreme Court and then cheating on tariffs. And then he thanked the Ronald Reagan Foundation for exposing this fraud. Now, this angry reaction, Heather, is a little bit surprising because earlier this week, it seemed that Trump saw the ad, the Ontario ad, and didn't have quite the same reaction. Have a listen to what he said.
Saw an ad last night from Canada. If I was Canada, I'd take that same ad also. But they're actually on television taking ads, but I do believe that everybody's too smart for that.
You know, and the big difference here, Heather, is that Trump has never abruptly ended all talks with Canada, even when, these negotiations have been really finding its footing. The two teams have always talked, even if it's not directly between Prime Minister Mark Carney and President Trump. So we'll wait to see what the fallout is on this.
Donald Trump is calling the Ontario ad fake, but the Ontario government has always made it clear that using Ronald Reagan's remarks, as you say, they were unedited. They came from an address he gave in 1987, so countering the claim coming from the White House.
That's right. So the ad directly takes audio from Reagan's 1987 speech, and there is zero evidence that it's been altered in any way. However, it does only use about a minute of a 5-minute speech, and it doesn't use the part in which Reagan talks about reluctantly putting tariffs on Japanese goods. The ad also doesn't speak to the context of the speech. Reagan is essentially telling Americans to fight against a congressional bill that would have forced the president to put tariffs on countries accused of unfair trade practices. But Reagan also very clearly lays out that he thinks tariffs hurt American workers, the American economy in the long run, and he even speaks to this shared value with Canada. Have a listen to a part of the original speech that was not used in Ontario's ad.
Now, that message of free trade is one I conveyed to Canada's leaders a few weeks ago, and it was warmly received there. Indeed, throughout the world, there's a growing realization that the way to prosperity for all nations is rejecting protectionist legislation and promoting fair and free competition.
Again, a reminder of warmer U.S.-Canada relations. President Reagan went on to say in that address that he remembered living through the Great Depression and how the tariffs at that time deepened the depression and prevented economic recovery.
Chris, thank you so much for beginning our coverage there in New York, the U.S. side of things. And now as we go to Ottawa, Janice McGregor is there with some insights on a story that's certainly going to be preoccupying Ottawa today. The Prime Minister and the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, Janice, they've been doing the good cop, bad cop thing when it comes to U.S. President Trump and the trade war. Has that been, is this evidence, I guess, that this has backfired, this strategy now?
Yeah, indeed. I think you can make an argument that it's actually working exactly as intended. You could also make an argument that it's now blowing up in their face. Look, the Ontario government spent about $75 million on this ad buy on major U.S. networks. It was supposed to be continuing for months. This was not a one-off, but it did have that spot during the Blue Jays championship baseball game earlier this week. Apparently, that's when the U.S. president took notice of this, and when Doug Ford heard that the U.S. president had seen it and wasn't happy about it, well, here's what he told reporters, and, you know, basically I could sum it up as sorry, not sorry.
I heard that the president heard our ad. I'm sure he wasn't too happy, but it's real because it was coming from the best president the country's ever seen, Ronald Reagan. It's going to be focused right across the country, but also in Republican-held areas, because what I feel, the Reagan Republicans are going to be fighting with a MAGA group, and let's hope Reagan Republicans win.
It's not clear that the Ontario government has much to fear from the Reagan Foundation's claim of copyright infringement, as you were just discussing with Chris. The Premier's office pointing out last night that this is entirely in the public domain. And let's be frank, this isn't really a legal fight. This is a political one. Ford's approach is very aggressive. The Prime Minister has been taking a different tone. Last week when Ford was calling for more retaliation in return for the latest moves against Canada's auto sector, Mark Carney said no. Now is the time to talk, not punch. But by yesterday, it was notable that the Prime Minister seemed to have abandoned the pitch he was making earlier for a bigger, kind of comprehensive and economic security partnership with the Trump administration.
In the situation we're in right now with the United States, with the negotiations we're having with the United States, is we're having very detailed, specific, constructive negotiations for the steel industry, the aluminum industry. There's elements of the energy industry, a few other components in there, because the Americans are moving to an approach which is sector by sector as opposed to global. There will be a review of our overall agreement, the CUSMA agreement with the U.S. and Mexico, that's coming up in a few months' time, and so broader aspects will be brought there.
Now, Carney there was speaking of constructive negotiations, particularly for the steel industry. Does this post now blow that up? Or is this indicative of some kind of final hardball tactic on Trump's part because things had been circling closer to a deal? With Ford standing right beside him yesterday, the Prime Minister said, look, if there's no progress, Canada's going to have to do what's necessary to protect its workers. And it was notable that by the end of the day, Ottawa was revoking some tariff exemptions in retaliation for the jobs that automakers GM and Stellantis have moved south recently.
You know, we talk often, Janice, about feeling the whiplash of some of the decision-making coming out of the White House, but that doesn't really seem to capture what's been happening as far as this trade war and the tariff disputes between the U.S. and Canada. He may call an end to the talks, but it doesn't turn out to be the end for real. So where does this leave Canada as of this morning with these posts?
Yeah, both Trump and Carney are on their way to Asia right now for some key regional summits there. What's going to happen when these two leaders are in a room with one another? We have had no official statement from the federal government, what they make of all of this. Our colleagues from Radio Canada have heard that Canada did get a little bit of notice before this post went up, that apparently it was a surprise to see this, but also the take that Radcan was given was that this isn't a pretext for pausing the talks, that Donald Trump is legitimately mad because of this advertisement. So here's the question. Does the federal government put pressure on Ontario to pull it? And is Ontario willing to pull it at this point? Look, when Trump took offense back in June to Canada's digital services tax, remember, rescinding it, cutting it, was the price to pay just for the privilege of being able to continue talks, keep those going. It may not be politically sustainable, however, here at home for the Carney government to keep on making concessions just for the privilege of continuing negotiations that to this point have nothing to show for themselves.
Janice, thank you very much. And you're going to be interested in this because just as Janice was reporting to us, we got the first response this morning from Ontario Premier Doug Ford. And this is what it says. It's a social media post that Canada and the United States are friends, neighbors, and allies. President Ronald Reagan knew that we are stronger together. God bless Canada and God bless the United States. And it links to the Ronald Reagan address in full from 1987. So again, they have talked about how it is an unedited version of what he said then, how it is in fact in the public domain. So they've done no wrong in using that in that way. That has just moved on social media.